Hey guys, I thought I would share with you some crock pot recipe hacks that I'm putting together for my aunt. She wanted to have some recipe ideas to start using her new crock pot, and while I was doing that, I figured, there are some tips that I want to give her also outside of the recipes to help her to make these crock pot meals healthier and set her up for success with, without sabotaging herself with a lot of things that tend to be in crock pot meals because crock pot meals are traditionally very comfort foodish. And so I did put together some meal ideas for her, and I'll show you a few of them. And now these aren't necessarily all healthy crock pot ideas, but there are little tricks you can do to make crock pot meals healthier. So I gave her some of my favorite ones. So I'll show you what I've got here. I've got there's a slow cooker Mongolian beef crock pot recipe, and it looks like that's backwards to you, so I won't hold them up, but I have a slow cooker cabbage roll recipe. I have a slow cooker chili recipe, and I have one of my favorites is a crock pot Greek chicken recipe. And I'm also giving her just what you'd find in the store, a slow cooker pot roast recipe. And I always like to find these at Big Lots, which is a chicken crock pot recipe. It's harder to find good chicken crock pot recipes. Usually red meat crock pot recipes are easy to find. But I wrote her this list and of crock pot healthier hacks, and I wanted to read it to you guys because these are pretty simple things you can do to just tweak your crock pot recipes a little bit in order to make them a little bit healthier. So the first one I have here is to use London broil for red meat instead of whatever red meat they're calling for. So a lot of times they'll call for chuck or things that are fattier meats. But a London broil, you can actually get on sale, and you're not going to have any bone in it. There's not going to be any weight in it except for the meat. So it's going to be affordable, especially if you keep an eye out for sales. Like if you can find it for $2.99 a pound, that's really good price. There's very little fat on it, so it's easy to cut the fat off, and then it's a very tender meat, so it works really well with all kinds of red meat dishes that you might want to use it in. It's very lean, so that's a good substitution for red meat dishes that might call for a different meat. And then the second tip I have here is if you're going to use ground meat, whether that's beef or turkey, you want to use a very lean ground meat or turkey. So you want to use at least a 90%, if not a 92% lean ground beef. Or if you're using turkey, you want to use at least a 94% lean turkey to make chili or whatever it is that you might make in your crock pot. The third tip I have is to measure out any oil or fats 1 tablespoon at a time instead of pouring. So we have a tendency to just pour oil to cook something in, or to just eyeball it, and you inadvertently will put a ton more fat and calories in your food, even adding cheese, feta, or something like that. And this works outside of crock pot, like if you're having a salad and you're adding salad dressing. Always better to measure out fats and oils 1 tablespoon at a time, and then you use the minimum amount necessary for the recipe. So if the recipe calls for a certain amount and that is the minimum, then measure it out, make it a level measurement. But if you're cooking anything else, just add things 1 tablespoon at a time and make a decision. Do I need to add more, or is this going to be enough? And especially if you can spread that oil or fat around in there, you may find that 1 tablespoon is enough, or at least less than what you thought you would need to use. And then the fourth tip I have here is replace potatoes with rutabagas whenever possible. Now, this is something that I do specifically for crock pot meals because potatoes are a staple in most crock pot meals, but I recently discovered rutabagas and I love them. And not turnips. Turnips are good for certain things, but what I found for a good replacement for crock pot meals is rutabagas. And you want to cut the waxy outside off and then just cut it into chunks like you would a large potato, and put that in your crock pot, and it cooks about the same amount of time. The fifth one is sear your meats before adding to the crock to improve flavor and texture. So the convenience of crock pot meals is that you can just throw everything in, but it makes a huge difference in the flavor of your food if you sear the meats first. Now all that involves is before you put the meats in, you take a hot pan on your stove and you put a light coating of olive oil in there and let the meat cook on each side for a minute or two before you add it to your crock pot meal. And now if you're using small chunks of meat, then you wouldn't want to sear it. But if you're using like a large piece of meat or a couple, like let's say you're putting in some chicken thighs, you want to sear them on each side before you put them in the crock pot. And then the sixth tip that I wrote here is it's better to use less salt when cooking and add it to taste when eating. So you can't really avoid salt and sodium if you're using one of these packets, right? So if you're going to use one of those, you're sacrificing sodium. But if you are following a recipe, a lot of times you can cut down on the salt in the recipe or use a low sodium broth, or if it calls for soy sauce, you can use less soy sauce than what it recommends. And then when you sit down to eat, you can add salt. I like using pink Himalayan salt right to your meal, and then you will use a considerable lesser amount than you would if you added it directly to your crock pot. So that is a little tip as well. So I hope that those healthier crock pot hacks helped you guys out, and I'm always interested to learn more. So if you guys have figured out any healthy crock pot hacks that you want to share with me, comment below and let me know if you've ever tried any of the ones that I've tried, and I hope to hear from you guys soon. Take care.